Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy and Tia Mitchell.
Hello, Georgia Democrats! Are y'all ready to win this election? It's great to be here with you tonight. So grateful for your presence in this moral moment in our country.
We went inside one of the most important Democratic gatherings of the year. That was the Democratic Party of Georgia's Carter Lewis dinner here in Atlanta just a couple of nights ago. It's part celebration, part strategy session, and with Georgia once again at the center of the political map in 2026. What's said in these rooms matters because when you listen closely, Tia, there's a clear playbook emerging. I know you were there with me, listening to all these speeches, listening to the optimism in the room. But you can't help, though, also ask, we've heard this optimism among Democratic crowds before, and we've also seen these election cycles end with Republican triumphs.
Yeah, it was interesting because, Greg, you and I went around asking certain prominent Democrats or candidates, what they felt the playbook was. And they were pretty consistent in that, which I think is further evidence that, Democrats believe they have a plan. They believe they have a winning message, but it's about putting it to the test. So we'll see, what happens. But I do think Democrats at least feel like they've got a path out of the so-called wilderness.
Yeah, I think they see this huge opportunity. It's something that Charlie Bailey called a cracked door, not a wide open door, but a cracked door. I think there are so many things happening simultaneously at the federal level, at the state level. At the federal level, of course, we have President Trump just in this daily barrage of news that is more often than not good for Republicans lately, with the war in Iran and gas prices going up, now inflation going up. At the state level, just a complete turnover. There will be no incumbents on the statewide ballot for Republicans. And Republicans likewise are struggling at the state level between the results of the Public Service Commission, the results of the Eric Gissler special election outside of Athens, the results of the Marjorie Taylor Greene runoff filling her seat exercise where Democrats way overperformed. They just see the breadcrumbs that could be leading them out of the wilderness. However, it could be nothing. We'll see.
Yeah, this could be looked back as a footnote. Or remember when Democrats thought they had this chance. Certainly in 2022, there was this sort of enthusiasm and excitement. You had a ticket led by Senator Warnock and Stacey Abrams, who was one of the national rising stars of the Democratic Party. You had Republicans really feeling the squeeze. Governor Kemp was being pushed by Abrams on the left and David Perdue on the right. It felt like that cycle, if any cycle was there for Democrats to make big gains, it was that cycle. And Tia, we know how that ended.
Right. For both parties, candidates still matter. And for both parties, follow through is still going to matter, right? So you can have the best message. You can have, we know that just in midterms, the president's party doesn't do as well. So that already just bodes well for Democrats nationally. But you still have to put in the work. You still have to have the right people. And I mean, both parties know that. But, that's why what's going to happen in a little bit over a month with these primaries is so important to both parties because they want to feel like they're setting themselves up for success or giving them the best chance possible in November when it will be head to head, essentially. But we know that in some of these primaries, there are Democrats who think one candidate or another is stronger in various races, and same for Republicans.
Here's State Representative Jasmine Clark on what she says is the winning message for Democrats. She is a candidate for Congress in one of those competitive primaries against incumbent Democrat David Scott.
The winning message is definitely 100% affordability, but we have to hone in on what that means for different people. So we're talking about affordable health care, because right now people can't afford their medicines, they can't afford to go to the doctor. They're more afraid of the hospital bill than the hospital issue. At the same time, when we talk about affordability, we're talking about being able to afford gas to get to work and being able to afford groceries when you go to the grocery store. There are people walking into the grocery store right now saying, I want to make spaghetti for dinner. By the time they get to the beef aisle and see the cost of beef, they're saying, never mind, we're having ramen noodles.
Patricia, that word came up again and again and again, affordability. This has been the affordability cycle. Republicans and Democrats are saying that these races hinge on affordability, cost of living.
Yeah, and Democrats have been much more successful in staying on message with affordability in all of the races that they have been successful in, the PSC races, the Eric Gissler race, that race in Georgia's 14th. Affordability has been the Democrats' number one issue. President Trump makes it very difficult for Republicans to stay on affordability because he is just a ping ball all over the place. And more often than not, in the last 8 weeks, it has been nothing to do with affordability. It's been all about Iran. As gas prices have gone up, he has also said, well, we can handle a little bit of high gas prices in exchange for all of the things that I'm trying to do in Iran. That just makes it so tough for Republicans at the state level to overcome that, to be supportive of President Trump and also stay on this message that at least on the House side of the state legislature, they were very narrowly focused on that. The Senate side got a little far afield, but they're trying to stay on affordability as Republicans. It's being made very, very difficult by the daily and hourly news cycle coming out of the White House.
Yeah, and that's going to be something you're going to continue to see Democrats do, which is tie the Republican candidates' campaigns, you name it, even if they have very little to do with federal policies, to Donald Trump. This is what State Representative Syra Draper told us at that gala. She is a candidate for an open state Senate seat in very deep blue part of Atlanta.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I think Republicans are absolutely nervous. I have seen a change in their behavior. I think the 2026 legislative session was really different from previous sessions where they were throwing red meat to their base, but not this year. This year they were talking about those kitchen table issues. They were trying to talk to the middle. They were trying to make themselves seem like they were moderate. They were trying to disassociate themselves with the policies of Donald Trump. That is not something they have done before. It is not something they would be doing if they didn't see what a liability he was for their party and if they weren't worried about their future.
I know that Republicans had their big gala a couple days earlier. That was closed press, so we couldn't get to it. But, I heard from people in that room who texted me afterwards. I'm sure they texted you guys and said there was optimism. There was the usual rah, 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 but there was this underlying sense of, the 14th race had just finished with a 12-point victory for Republicans rather than the 30-point victories that they had come accustomed to in that district. And of course, the memories of the PSC flips last year of Eric Gissler's win in a deep red Northeast Georgia seat, they still are lingering on the minds of Republicans.
Right. And I also think, Republicans, not only do they have less to celebrate, but they have fewer on the ballot for this year. They have so many contested primaries that they don't have like the party leaders they can put up there and celebrate without ticking people off, Kelly Loeffler was the keynote. But she's not someone who's going to be on the ballot. You know what I mean? And so at least that we know of. And if she's going to be on the ballot, probably not this year. Yeah. They couldn't put Mike Collins or Derek Dooley or Buddy Carter on stage without putting them all on stage. And they just don't have as many, they couldn't put Burt Jones on stage without putting Rick Jackson on stage. So I would be curious, somebody who was there needs to drop a dime on the whole program, because who could they put up there without, having all of these, this parade of candidates attacking one another from the stage? It's, whereas John Ossoff has no primary, Sean Harris has no primary. Both of them, the Democratic Party could put on stage.
Yeah. A quick aside, I was told an activist gave the Pledge of Allegiance and kind of gave a shout out to Mike Collins. So there was those efforts to try to bring in those top tier candidates in that way.
Yeah, and I personally think that primaries can be really healthy for parties. It can help them kind of suss out where is the energy, where's the enthusiasm. It makes those candidates stronger if they've already had to deal with a lot of these attacks. I think Stacey Abrams really suffered from not having a good, strong primary in 2022. But I think one dynamic also that Republicans are running into, and that dinner is a great example, is that Governor Kemp is not going to be on the ballot for Republicans for the first time in 12 years. And a lot of Republicans have ridden in on some very long coattails of Governor Kemp's. And that's not to say that the lower level Republicans were not strong candidates, but Governor Kemp was so strong in November, particularly in 2022, that it has just lifted this party, even when he was in a battle for his life against the leader of the party at the national level with the president. And I think that this is going to be a test for Republicans. Can you survive without Kemp at the top of the ticket? And that's when the GOP primary for governor becomes so important, that they have somebody coming out of there who is electable in the same way that Kemp is, who has that cross-party appeal in the same way that Kemp does. And you can hear voters saying, I'm trying to balance, like, who do I want versus who do I think can win? Because for the first time in a long time, Republicans are a little worried about who's going to win. And that's a different vibe in this state than we've seen in 2 decades.
And something he told us a couple of weeks ago, Patricia, the governor said basically he's not eager to wade into the governor's race. He is very intent, of course, on helping Derek Dooley in the Senate contest, but he is not about to jump into that governor's race. He says basically, I don't know about the governor's race, but I know who I am backing, and that is Derek Dooley. One other theme we heard about, we know all the Democrats oppose Trump's agenda, but we also heard them sharpening their case to be a check on Donald Trump's agenda. That is certainly something that Senator John Ossoff has made a key part of his reelection platform, is that Democrats can be a check on all this. They can start ending what he sees as the chaos and the back and forth in Congress. Tia, you talked to Senator Josh McLaurin. He's a state senator running for lieutenant governor, who also talked about stability.
I got one word for you: stability. I think everybody across the political spectrum is tired of the chaos. There are Republicans and independents who are going to vote Democratic because they want a steadier hand.
So, Tia, that was the theme too. Voters are exhausted by the chaos and looking for something calmer.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that he tied, the obvious answer is like affordability, but he said stability, which kind of they go hand in hand, right? Because the reason why affordability is so, impactful is you can't plan. If you're someone who has to budget and live paycheck to paycheck, and all of a sudden gas is up $1 a gallon, well, that makes it hard to make ends meet because you're trying to predict how much money you're going to need every month. And so for him, he's talking about stability almost as like the emotional aspect of affordability, a steady hand, someone you can trust. Things, the news not being so jarring, because of course we hear that a lot from when we talk to voters, like there's always something, I feel so stressed out, things are always happening from one day to another and you can't predict it, and you just kind of want to put your head in a pillow and hide from it all. And so what Senator McLaurin said was, if we can present stability, it'll kind of calm people's nervous system about the overall political climate. And I thought that was just a really interesting way of thinking about it.
The overstimulation of it all. So the message coming out of that room was pretty clear: focus on affordability, tie Republicans to Trump, and present Democrats as the steadier alternative. Now, whether that message actually works in Georgia is the other question. We're going to tackle that when we come back from a quick break. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy and Tia Mitchell. A reminder, if you've got a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call the hotline anytime, leave a question, we'll play it back and answer it right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. That's 770-810-5297. You can also email us at politicallygeorgia@ajc.com. Shaney B and his army of interns cannot wait to hear from you. Okay, guys, it's not just about messaging. It's also about where Democrats think they can compete or at least cut the margins down. One of the candidates I talked to at that gala was David Hall. He is running in a super conservative Southeast Georgia. He basically called it the Okefenokee district. It's like right near the swamp. It probably hasn't elected a Democrat in decades. He's running. He knows he has long odds, but he wants to show that there's a Democratic standard bearer in that territory.
Back in the last presidential election, the county that I live in, Brantley County, was the #1 reddest county in the entire nation. So my message to them is that I'm there. I listen to you. I'm showing up at meetings. Most of our people don't even know who our current incumbent is. They've never heard from him. They don't know anything about him.
Guys, we know that Democrats this cycle are competing in about, I think it's 89 or 90% of House districts and Senate districts, legislative districts. These were districts that for years, both parties, would run unopposed in a lot of these districts. We're seeing Republicans compete more and more in Democratic-led districts, and Democrats compete more in Republican-led districts. And all this is not to say that there's going to be some massive upheaval in the House. It's very unlikely more than a handful of seats flip, Patricia. But this is a part of the Democratic strategy to at least drive those margins. I think Brantley County might have gotten 92% for Trump in 2016, right? If you can start cutting those margins to 87%, 83% for Republicans rather than 90+%, you start to pick up some gains throughout the state.
Yes. And this, in fact, is the mirror image of President Trump's strategy in 2024. When you go in and look at, well, which counties did he flip? He didn't flip a bunch of counties, but what he did was drive up his margins in red counties and narrow his margins in blue counties. So it was just sort of this uniform shifting to the right. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that they had candidates running in races and that they were really driving their margins where they were already strong. And just ever so slightly, if you can just bring Democrats down like a hair in the metro counties, the Republicans really believed that they could get to a winning margin, and they did. In the 129 counties that Trump won, 117 became more red in 2024. And that was the margin of victory. And that is exactly what the Democrats are trying to reverse. And the first and most important way to do that, other than relying on the news cycle, which you cannot control, is to get people in your counties pushing this message and at least pushing an alternative, a viable alternative to the status quo. And if the status quo is not popular, that can be very effective.
Tia, that won't be easy.
No.
Yeah. It is not popular. One thing that I wanted to point out that I thought was interesting, because we mentioned the competition is going both ways. And it's also, as we know, intra-party. There are primaries that are setting up those generational divides, those generational competitions, if you will. For example, we know in Georgia's 13th congressional district, David Scott, who's been the incumbent for, more than 2 decades. He's got a lot of challengers who are talking about, someone who's going to be more present in the district, more active, a fresher take. But it's not just on the Democratic side. Christian Hurd, who was initially running in the 14th congressional district for Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat, he dropped out. He endorsed Clay Fuller, and now he's running for a legislative seat against a Republican incumbent. And I spoke to him when I was in Georgia last week. And similarly, he was saying, the incumbent is not present. People don't know him. People don't see him. And I think it's time for a new generation that's going to be out there, more active in the district, meeting the needs of constituents. So I think that's really interesting. We may see that play out in several primaries across the state, even again, within the party, these conversations about who should best represent us. Maybe they might agree policy-wise, but whether there should be generational changes.
we also heard something similar from outside Georgia. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, he's like the Democratic avatar for Democratic success in red states. He's also a likely, sounded awful like not just a potential presidential candidate, a very likely one, Tia, doing our sit down with him. He delivered almost the same playbook in an interview with us.
I think it's about being laser focused on people's everyday needs. The recognition that people aren't as political as we think they are. They don't wake up thinking about the next governor's race. They wake up thinking about their job and whether they make enough to support their family. They wake up thinking about how far they're going to have to travel for their next doctor's appointment and what the roads and bridges are like that they're using to get there. They're thinking about dropping their kids off at school, whether they're getting the best education, and they're thinking about whether they're safe in their community. I believe that candidates that can satisfy all those issues, that yes, stand up for all their convictions, but spend 80% of their time on those things that matter to 100% of the people of Georgia or the American people, those are winning candidates.
Tia, he later on gave a 30-minute keynote speech to the crowd. I think it went over pretty well. I had a lot of Democrats saying, but how? How did he get elected in a state that had gone 30+% points to Trump? How does a Democrat? Well, the name helps. I know you're from Kentucky.
The name helps. Yes. I was going to say that. The name definitely helps. His dad was governor. And I think, in Kentucky, like many southern states, it wasn't that long ago when Democrats were in control. And so you have those kind of blue dog conservative Democrats. And I think the Beshear name resonates with people who kind of see them as not like your progressive firebrand Democrats.
Patricia, is that model, is that sort of center down the middle model going to work too in a state like Georgia, at least because Jon Ossoff is not running as he has a very liberal voting record. He's running as someone who can reach the both sides of the aisle, who can reach to the middle. But he's also not sort of positioning himself as a centrist in the way that we see other candidates like Michael Thurmond in the governor's race position himself as.
Yeah, I really think if somebody's positioning is authentic to who they are, that may be the most important piece of this. But Georgia Democrats have not really had a choice to get behind a moderate for governor in 8 years. Maybe that would be successful. I think this might be the era with Donald Trump acting so aggressively at the national level and the international level. Tia was talking earlier that the conversation about affordability, that is also a stand-in for stability. It's a stand-in for focus. It's a stand-in for I'm paying attention to you. I'm listening to you. In the meantime, Donald Trump is tweeting, "Open the strait, you crazy bastards," or "You're all going to hell." Praise be Allah. That's the message at the national level. And so I think if Democrats can bring it back, as Andy Beshear said, to just kitchen table issues, and we're listening to you, we hear you, and we can control this, we can take care of this while you live your lives, I think that is a very successful potential message. The other benefit of Andy Beshear's last name is that divorces him from the national brand of Democrats, which at the moment is also extremely weak. So if any of these Democratic candidates can establish their own brand, that's very difficult to do as a first-time kind of gubernatorial candidate. If any of these Democrats can have their own brand apart from the national Democratic brand, I think that would be extremely helpful because then I think they have a better chance of getting across the finish line. That's really tough in a state that still feels, to me, a little more Republican than Democratic, but it's the best chance I think they have of picking it up statewide.
This is an aside, and we can do a whole range of episodes on this, but do we potentially have 3 maybe potential presidential candidates in the same room with Senators Warnock, Ossoff, and Andy Beshear? There's been a lot of chatter, especially about Ossoff. It's all online. I detect nothing from his camp about him potentially running.
His camp is not booking tickets to Iowa.
No, but at the same time, there's still chatter. And, Senator Warnock, there's always been chatter about that. And of course, Andy Beshear is making it very clear that it is on his radar a 2028 run is at least in the in his eyesight.
So I think it's interesting. Governor Beshear, I would be surprised if he doesn't at least try to run. People create the exploratory committees. They go to the early states and see if they catch on. And if they don't, they just go back to their normal lives or whatever. Because I do think Governor Beshear is term limited. So he's kind of, why not test the waters? I think for Senator Ossoff, it depends on what November looks like, and not just whether he wins, but how does he win? What's the climate? As we know, he's a young man as well. So he could win and run for president in 2034. You know what I mean? Like, he has time to decide.
He could run in the
cycle.
2050s.
And then for Senator Warnock, I think it's a tougher call because he would be in cycle in 2028. So in 2028, he has to either run for president or run for Senate, because he can't do both, right? Because his seat is up for election. I think Democrats would not want him to give up his seat, because in a state like Georgia, there's no guarantee that another Democrat could win. So I think it's a harder call for Warnock to run for president in 2028, just given the politics of the seat he would have to give up.
I just wish I had gotten a picture of the three of them all shaking hands and smiling, just in case. So let's talk about Senator Ossoff, because, of course, he has framed this election as not just opposition to Trump, but also a check on Trump and Republican power in Congress. He also has come out very adamantly, very forcefully against the war against Iran, saying it's Donald Trump's war. It's a waste of time and U.S. resources, and that same money could be spent to expand universal pre-K or, take on education initiatives. He also talked about his efforts to reach out to disgusted Republicans who he's going to need to win. He's going to need to win a significant amount of Trump voters in order to win the November election. Here's what Senator Ossoff said.
Republicans pull me aside, or they call me on the phone and they tell me they're afraid of where this president is taking us. They want checks and balances. They're voting for a Democrat for the first time in their lives. And we welcome them to our coalition.
Patricia, that was an underlying message there. It's like the big tent coalition, because in a state like Georgia, you can't just rely on your base as a Democrat to win an election.
Yeah, I think it's really smart positioning of him, though, because there are many Republicans who are not okay with the direction that the president is going in recently. The only check on the president other than the Supreme Court is the Congress. And this particular Congress has done very little to act as a check on President Trump. And so Ossoff is offering himself up to be that person and to remind people there is a way to slow this down. There is a way to get these headlines turned around. There is a way to put some brakes on the Trump administration. It's by sending me back to Washington. It's a very clear yes or no. It's all about numbers and math and increasing the Democratic margins in order to have a check on the president. So I think that's really smart messaging from him. And it happens to actually be the truth as well. And when it comes down to, if we're talking about a brand, in those PSC races, all of those voters did not know the names of the Democrat they were voting for. They probably didn't even know what the platform was of the Democrat they were voting for. They knew Republicans were in charge of the PSC. Their prices have gone up over and over and over again, and over a course of 8 different price increases. And so they've just voted for the Democrat to make it stop. And that is the same proposition that Ossoff is offering people who are not Democrats. Vote for me and I will try and make it stop. We're not going to invade Greenland, Cuba, any other countries that we're thinking about. That's what he's offering. And even for somebody who does not support Ossoff, if they have a lot of heartburn and anxiety over the direction Trump is going in, that's leaving a door open for them to come to Ossoff, even if they're not Democrats.
Well, Democrats left that ballroom believing the political environment is shifting in their favor, that the political playing field was tilting in their balance. Georgia has a way of testing those assumptions. With the Senate race, a governor's race, and control of power on the line, this state will continue to be one of the biggest proving grounds for that strategy. And we're about to find out if it works. That's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you enjoyed what you heard, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform, and share Politically Georgia with a friend. It helps others connect with our show and join our conversation. We'll talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.